Hey everyone, this is your Professor Adam Dunstan, and it is so great to be with you today. We'll be talking about one of my favorite topics of the whole course, which is family and marriage, with the subtitle of What's That All About? And what it's about, in part, is one of the most fundamental forms of relationships, which is the theme for this unit, that structures so much of human life and human society. And although families and marriages are extremely diverse across cultures, they're also a universal feature of cultures. And so that's going to be the main topic for today. And I do want to say that I understand going into this lecture that people come from a lot of different family backgrounds or backgrounds in terms of how they were raised and in what way they were raised. And I want to emphasize that as I talk about the sort of centrality of family and marriage in terms of human societies, I'm not trying to dismiss situations in which people may have not ideal relationships with their own family. I'm just trying to discuss the fact that from an anthropological perspective, all societies do have families, and those families tend to be an important way in which the society is structured. So with that little caveat in mind, let's get going. First of all, I want to thank the people that did the mid-semester evaluation already, and if you didn't, you have until November 2nd to do it, so head on over to Blackboard under Unit 2, you'll find it. It's 10 extra credit points, and several people mentioned that I put memes into the PowerPoints and that they really like that, so there you go. Here's another meme. Maybe there'll be more. We'll see. All right, learning objectives for the day. Number 1, understand basic forms of kinship. Number 2, understand why kinship is universal and its significance in broader human society. By the way, kinship is really just what anthropology speak for family, as it is in, I guess, a lot of fields. And so when I say kinship, just think family or extended family. And we're going to understand some cross-cultural patterns in marriage. So there's a right and a wrong way to teach about kinship. Kinship is a topic that's always fascinated anthropologists, really of all 4 fields: linguistic anthropology, cultural anthropology, archaeology, physical anthropology. We're all very interested in it. For example, from a linguistic anthropology perspective, the first words almost inevitably that human children come up with are typically mama, dada, and those terms are, of course, also some of the most linguistically easy to pronounce names, and so they end up being the names for mothers and fathers in many, many different cultures, or papa. So kinship has always been something that we're kind of interested in as anthropologists. However, there's a right way and a wrong way to teach it. The wrong way is to teach you about all these different types of descent and the 8 central forms of kinship and memorize charts. Believe me, I had to do some of this when I was being trained. It's no fun for anybody. It sucks. So X that out. That's not how we're going to talk about it today. Instead, I want to talk about kinship and family in terms of its real-world impacts, as well as kind of some of the ways it challenges our conceptions about ourselves and about society. So let me share with you a real-world example of kinship really mattering. So of course, right now, we're all dealing with the pandemic of COVID-19. And, you know, it's a terrible thing that's going on, and I know a lot of people have been affected, both whether that's biologically, whether that's in terms of your family, whether you've experienced that in your own family, and I want to be sensitive to that. At the same time, I want to talk a little bit about COVID-19 for a second and how kinship plays such an important role in that. So one of the first nations to be really heavily affected by COVID-19 was, of course, Italy. I know it's hard to remember now, several months later, or several years, depending on when you're listening to this lecture. But Italy was affected very strongly first and had a very high mortality rate at first, which led people to wonder, well, why? And there was a lot of different factors that people brought up. For example, a high smoking rate in Italy was definitely a factor, since that caused lung impairment for people going into this disease. Another factor, of course, was the fact that in Italy, it is very common, much more common than in the United States, for people to live in multi-generational homes. I'm trying to remember what the percentage was. Was it something like 60%? Very high percentage of people that live in multi-generational homes, where you have sort of, you know, grandparents, parents and children, or some kind of arrangement like that. Contrast that with the United States, where that is sometimes happens. Certainly, I think our percentage is, I don't know, something like 20 to 30%. So it happens. It is also very common for elderly people to live on their own. It is also very common for elderly people to live in assisted living or care centers or senior neighborhoods. And so that, from a health perspective, from a public health perspective, presents really different dynamics, right? So in Italy, it's sort of was a worst case scenario for early spread, in the sense that parents, go out into the workplace and then come back and potentially transmit that virus to the grandparents in the home, who are extra vulnerable to it. So that is not an ideal situation. And of course, you then had very high rates of mortality, specifically among the elderly. There's different sort of demographics for here in the United States. There are definitely people in these age ranges that died, and this was very early on in the pandemic as well. In the United States, by contrast, we don't have multi-generational homes, but by concentrating elders in assisted living centers, we've tried to protect those, and in many cases been really successful. But in some cases, when coronavirus has gotten into elderly facilities, that has had a very rapid effect, since you have many vulnerable people in one location. And so, you have different ways in which how we structure family, how we decide what to do with our elderly family members, has a huge effect in terms of how a disease spreads, who it affects first, who it affects last, what rate at which it spreads. So kinship matters, family matters. These are important topics, and that'll be our subject for today.